Hello. Welcome. It is so good to see you, Jenna. How are you
Huh?
today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing so good. It is like 20 degrees here, which seems really cold, but we've had some really cold days, and so it's going to be up in the 50s this week, so I'm ready for it. Spring is here. We made it to
I
March.
was about to say that's your spring.
Yeah.
We we hit the 50s this week, so it felt amazing. I'll tell you, we were able to go outside, and I really enjoyed that.
Yes.
Well, welcome to Thriving Together. If you're a first-time listener here, we're Holly and Jenna, two moms that are currently parenting with a chronic illness. Our goal for this podcast is to meet with the intersect community of parenting or exploring options of parenting when you and your partner or your partner have a chronic condition. Both myself and Holly will share stories about the physical and emotional side of this unique parenting journey in hopes that this community helps us thrive a little bit more together. So, Holly, let's start with our favorite question. Are you thriving or surviving today?
I think I'm a bit of a mix and probably a little bit more towards thriving. Exciting life events. We bought a house and are in the
Very
process of
exciting.
moving. This is our first home that we're going to be owning, which is so exciting and terrifying. So we're living in boxes, but I think mostly excited. We'll be moving in the next couple weeks here, so I am very excited to just be settled into our new spot. How about you, Jenna? How has life been? Are we thriving or surviving?
Right now, I think I'm surviving. I had my infusion on Friday, so I'm just a little fatigued, a little just not feeling so great, but I'll be better in a few days. Yeah, it's been a busy few weeks. We've had our second birthday party for our little guy, and he was very excited. He loved that. And then I recently just got AFOs, which are ankle foot orthotics. For those who don't know, I have drop foot, so when I pick up my foot, a normal foot would be like this. Mine drops, so the AFOs kind of hold them up there for me. I was a little nervous because I didn't know how my little one would react to it, if he'd be embarrassed, if he would be like, he thought it was a toy. He did not care at all. So I worried for a couple weeks for no reason. So that's always a good sign.
Yes, classic toddler there. If it's not a snack, they don't care.
They don't care. That is for sure.
Well, speaking of kind of doing this move and life, as I have been kind of packing things up, I actually came across an article that we are going to use as kind of our jumping off point for today's episode. So back when I was doing my master's program, I did a capstone on the intersect between mental health and chronic illnesses. And I came across an article on microaggressions for specifically women that had either visible or invisible chronic conditions. And the kind of they identified about 12 common microaggressions. And it just really got my head thinking about how some of these continue to show up during parenting, during pregnancy, but also the way that they were showing up was still just a little bit different. And so Jenna and I took the time to kind of go through and identify 6 of them that were really prevalent during our parenthood journey. And we're going to talk about them here today. I'm so excited for our community to also join this conversation. So go ahead after listening to today. Put yours in the comments below too. I'm sure that we can all have a story about some of these, and we can really just kind of have that community moment together. So I'm going to start off by just defining what microaggressions are. So we're going to go ahead and go straight to Oxford's dictionary here. And the definition of a microaggression is the incident or action that is indirect, subtle, or unintentional that causes discrimination against a member of the marginalized group. So the article that we are going to use as our foundation is from Rhonda Olkin and Associates, which was published in 2019, The Experience of Microaggressions Against Women with Visible and Invisible Disabilities. And we are going to start with the very first one, which is denial of the disability experience. So in this one, Jenna, this is when a person is minimizing the effect of the disability for that person with a disability. So we'll go ahead and just jump in. Jenna, what does this one make you think of?
This one makes me think of some of those parenting groups where people, I've had people make comments, so, must be nice that you didn't have to carry a child for 9 months and you just get to have a baby. That one gets me going. And so does the experience of when people post about how, and in mom groups, we'll talk about this. They're rough. They will shame you for not breastfeeding. I don't have an option. I can't breastfeed. And, people make it seem that that's a horrible thing. And
Mm-hmm.
often in times at least in the arthritis community, um, even biological parents can't breastfeed, right? We might go on prednisone right after it, and we give birth, we can't breastfeed. That would be bad.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That was my experience there too. And I think let's all just call it out. Those mom groups suck.
They are the worst. They will tear you to shreds. Don't ask a question.
Yes, if you want to feel insecure about any choice you are making, please go ahead and make that post there. That
Yeah.
community is kind of rough. We should be supporting each other. And like Jenna, as you were saying, that these decisions are not easy where it's just like this or that, that there are many different pieces that go into a parent's decision, and especially things like breastfeeding. If it's not your boobs, you don't have a say. I
Nope.
think that is a life advice that we should all take. Um, but
Yeah, that
you're
goes
right.
across the board for all
Yes.
parents, not just
Yeah.
parents with chronic illnesses.
But there are so many choices that as a parent we have to really consider. And for me, this one really just highlights that when you have a chronic condition, you have to be making these choices in a different way than a parent that is maybe able-bodied or does not have the same condition. So, as you were mentioning, things like breastfeeding, where it's not a just do this situation, that there are many things to consider in there. I was in that camp of really anticipating that after pregnancy, I was going to go into a pretty severe flare. My condition has always been fairly active, and doesn't like to be well managed. And so, going through pregnancy, I 100% planned to formula feed, not only because my plan was to use prednisone as needed after birth, but also so that I could really have that support from my partner and not get burnt out right away, too. And those mom groups are so good at making us feel that that's the wrong decision, even though it was the right decision for, my baby and for our family. And there's so much more to consider. And when we deny that experience of a disability or the impact our disability does have on our decisions, I think that it honestly comes from that other person's maybe lack of knowledge, maybe it's their curiosity, or I'm trying to be generous with some of these
You're
moments
being a lot
here.
nicer than I am with it. So I, yeah, you know, ultimately people like to try to have a say, and it's their way of finding a way to be comfortable with somebody else's disability. Um, at the end of the day, I would have loved the experience to carry to full term. I would have loved the experience to breastfeed, maybe. I don't know. That probably wouldn't have happened, so who am I? Um, but to make comments online when somebody's asking a question, and you don't know their whole story and making snap judgments, it's something that we probably deal with a lot more than your average parent does.
Going into our second microaggression is um, the second class citizen. And this is when a person with a disability is not allowed to access the same rights as an abled individual. I'm going to also kind of loop in a couple other of our microaggressions on here because they're all very kind of related. So this would be assumed helplessness and the spread effect, assuming that the disability affects other parts of a person's ability as well too. And so we're going to go ahead and dive into this one too. Initially, this one, the helplessness really gets me in this one.
Same. That's exactly where my head went to.
Yes. Yeah, the assumption that I need help, the assumption that you have to help me more than any other parent, or that I somehow am parenting less than someone who doesn't have a chronic illness. That one, if you want to see me upset, that is the one to really, get me on.
Yeah, I agree. Like the notion that I do not play with my child or I am not involved in as many of his activities because I have a disability or I might need more breaks or things like that, that that gets me going. That makes me so angry. And I've always been that way. Like as soon as somebody assumes that I'm helpless, I will carry all 15 bags of groceries by myself before
Yeah.
I will let you help me.
I can think of so many examples, especially when my little was a baby, where people who they were maybe even like within my like immediate family would always try to like carry the car seat or offer to carry her everywhere, and it would just really irk me where she would be asking like, mom, like pick me up, or clearly needing a mom. And I was just noticing that people were stepping into that role more than what they did for when my sisters had their children. And when this is like a really great example of just like what a microaggression is, where we have to spend that time to decide, is this because of my illness? Are you acting this way because of my illness, or am I reacting to you? And it is so tricky to really tease out, but I always kind of come back to like, I know myself, and those feelings are still valid wherever they're coming from, even if there are those good intents of, oh, like I'll wear the baby carrier and I'll walk around with her. And it just breaks my heart when someone would do that, because I would have this moment of, that's supposed to be the mom. And it would be
Yeah.
so hard, even though I knew that they had such good intent of offering that. I was like, if someone assumes this is your baby and not mine, I'm gonna cry and we're gonna have to leave. So we cannot do this.
I totally get that. Like they always would say, "Oh, well, let me hold on. Let me give your body a break.
Yeah.
Just rest." And it's like, I don't, but I'm good. I don't need to rest. I'll tell you when I need to rest.
Yes, that is our spread effect, right? Of, because you have an illness, you don't have the same capacity to even set your own limits, to be successful in other areas, to be a good enough parent. And that is just so untrue, is that we are very competent, we are great parents, and just because we have an illness does not mean that we need another individual to step in any more than you would offer another mom.
Right.
All right, our third one, Jenna, is the denial of privacy. These are, I'm already laughing.
Yeah,
I
me
get
too.
these a lot.
Yeah, I think you should go first on this one because I think you get this a little bit more than I do.
uh, yeah, so for our listeners, I have mentioned it before, but I am under 5 foot. Um, my arthritis has always kind of been a little bit more obvious. I'm kind of the person where you see me out in public and you're like, something's wrong. I don't know what it is, but there's some kind of condition there. And so I get these denial of privacy questions where individuals, and I really take that most generous interpretation of them and try to extend that empathy so I don't extend rage, really ask these questions out of curiosity, but they ask very personal questions. And so when I was pregnant, I think one of the first things I heard was, oh, I just thought that you couldn't even have a baby. Or, well, are they worried? Are you high risk? How is that going to work? How are you going to give birth? It would be people where I'm like, you do not have the right to ask me this question. And, our secondary microaggression there of assuming that I haven't thought about how this baby is getting out of me yet before we got to this point. I assure you, these were things that I have already talked about with my team and have made informed decisions. And no random lady in the grocery store or fellow acquaintance that I kind of know, I'm not going to talk to you about my birth plan. That's not something that you need to be asking me.
No, no. I think I think this topic in particular is one that we often see. Like, I feel like if I had to pick one that happens the most, it's probably the invasion of privacy.
Yeah.
Um, like, I I don't have much where, I was pregnant and people were questioning a lot of that. But I remember when I was in my wheelchair, people would just come up and be like, "What happened?" I got a Facebook message once when I was in the rehabilitation hospital and said, "So how did you end up paralyzed?" And I don't even know how they found out that I was paralyzed at the
Oh
time.
my gosh.
And I was like, it was already so traumatic, and then to have to try to, like, I just
Yeah.
didn't answer it. But, like, I don't really know you that well. Why do you think that's okay to ask?
Yeah.
Um, things like that. Or when I was in a wheelchair, I was at the grocery store once, and somebody grabbed the handles and moved me so they could grab something I was in front of. And so they didn't even ask. They just moved me. And I was like, whoa.
Anyone listening, please never do that.
Oh, the wheelchair is somebody's body. Just imagine it as like another part, like, of their body. That is, do not touch it.
Yes.
Do
Yeah.
not touch the wheelchair.
And absolutely do not expect to be praised for helping someone if they have not asked for it. If someone is in a wheelchair or trying to be mobile around you and using assisted advice devices, and you come in and you hold the door extra long or you push them over the threshold, do not expect to be praised because they did not ask for your help. You are not the hero here. You can
No.
step back. You could ask, do you need help? Or in this case, just wait.
Or just say, hey, can I squeeze in there? And then I would have
Yes.
moved. Like, it's things like that where people think that they're privy to that. Or, my son and I, we do not look alike. Um, and people will often ask, oh, you couldn't get pregnant. Why? Things like that. It's none of your business.
I really struggle in these moments to figure out which part of me I should be responding with. Should it be the one that like comes back with something really sassy? I will get the experience of elevators all the time. I don't know what it is about being locked in a little box with some stranger for 30 seconds, but I will get these questions of like, oh gosh, like, why are you so little? Or I've never seen someone this little before. What do you have? And or I get just so many of these little short jokes. And sometimes,
The jokes.
yeah, thank you, Jenna. Yeah, see, they're not jokes. They are at my expense. They're making fun of something just physically about me that I have no control over. And in these moments, sometimes I will respond more with that, like, assertive side where, they'll say something like, oh, like, I could just put you in my pocket. I don't know why people
That's
say
so
that.
cringeworthy.
You're
Please don't ever say that.
fun-sized. And I would come back sometimes with, like, actually, yeah, I have juvenile idiopathic arthritis. And I'll, like, just kind of, like, push
Throw it
back
back
a
at them.
little bit of, like, you were asking things about my private life, about who I am, and I'm going to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable because you're making me feel uncomfortable. And then
Yeah,
other times I go a little bit into the just like passive side where I'll joke back or I'll just uncomfortably laugh and hope that the elevator opens.
yeah.
But it hits a little bit different when these denial of privacy questions come towards, are you as an individual making informed decisions about your kid? I felt more reactive when I would get the questions of, well, is your kid going to get arthritis now too? Did
Yeah.
you give your kid arthritis? And what if she gets arthritis? As if I somehow am like putting her at risk of just by existing, I somehow am doing something wrong.
I feel that that is probably the hardest question that we get. I mean, from family, from friends, from anybody who knows that you have this illness. Well, did you give it to your child? Did you do, what if you do? I'm going to feel horrible if I did, but at the same, it's not because I gave it to them. It's because I know that they're going to have to go through something that I went through and I didn't particularly enjoy.
Yeah,
But it is not your fault. It is, you had no choice in that. I think that's probably one of the toughest questions that we get asked.
absolutely. I like to, depending on my relationship with that person, I like to give a little bit of the facts of it tends to skip generations and the kind of arthritis I have, we're not actually even sure if it is genetically linked or, if
Yeah.
there are someday going to be like pieces where we can test for it. And I also like to remind myself too of the medications are so different from when we grew up with arthritis. And I see these individuals who, yes, maybe get diagnosed one earlier because we are more aware of it and have access to medications that are truly more effective. And so their prognosis and the severity of their disease is so much less than what it
Yeah,
is for our generation. And we see that when we look at the generation before us,
we
who
do.
did have a lot more of the limitations, who did have more of the deformities, where it is getting better and it isn't
Yeah.
something that I have to feel like I have made like a wrong decision because of a what if. Radical acceptance says there are so many pieces of our genetics and we don't know, and so we're
Yeah.
going to make the decisions that are just right for us.
Right. And, I think we had this conversation personally.
Mm-hmm.
And, we look at the younger generation, and most of the time they are living the average child life. You're not seeing deformities early on. You're not seeing like limitations in childhood as much anymore, things like that. So, um, there's always that positive side to it too, but we can't control it. Please don't ask that question. It's not your business. um,
Not your business.
Now, I do want to throw in a caveat here when these topics come up, and usually like people when children want to know in particular. I'm talking about children. I'm
Yeah.
open to sharing. If children aren't asking questions about, well, is your kid gonna have arthritis? They're
Mm-hmm.
asking, well, why do you walk like that, or why
Yes.
do you need a cane? That stuff I will always answer nicely and politely because they're just curious kids. They're just trying to understand. When an adult does it, they know better. So please don't. But kids, I'm okay with.
Absolutely. When a kid, and I work with children, and so they will often be like, you're I'm taller than you and I'm almost as tall as you, or kind of whatever it is. And I do kind of respond back of like, you're right to notice that. You are right to notice that. And our bodies are all different, and this is just my body. And the thing that is so different that strikes me between kids and adults is kids are like, yeah, bodies are different. That's your body. None of my business. I'm going to keep going on. And adults will really come back to it and be like, well, tell me your family history. Tell me more about this. It's like, nope, this is my body, and that's not yours to know.
You're right.
Yeah. So our next one, speaking of our
Yes.
bodies, is desexualization, experiencing devaluation as a romantic prospect. So this kind of comes to play when you are in that stage of forming relationships and where others start to devalue you as a sexual being, as someone who is able to engage in intimacy. This one I was really trying to think of, and it kind of made me think of this memory of when I was 21. I had my first kind of like serious relationship, that we were talking about future, and I remember we were on this like really romantic date, and we were talking about, those hypotheticals of, you're going to get this job in this town, and I'm going to have this job, and we're going to just like build this whole life together, even though this is our third date.
Yeah.
And I remember he said something like, oh, well, like, you're going to grow out of this, right? And it took me a minute, and I was like, oh,
Oh
you're talking about
no.
arthritis. You think I'm going to grow out of arthritis? And he goes, well, yeah, like, eventually you're going to be, like, normal and be able to have kids,
Ooh,
right?
normal.
And in that moment, I was like, boy, bye.
Kill the vibes.
Kill the vibes. And I was like, oh, no, buddy. That's not how this works.
Yeah. No. That yeah. So people tend to think that we can't have sex because somehow it might hurt us. I very well remember, and she meant it. She really meant it out of curiosity. She said, "So can you have sex? Like, is that gonna hurt you? Like, is that gonna hurt?" And I'm like, I can have sex. Like that's I'm
Yep.
I'm just like you. I can have sex. And it took me by surprise because I was like, oh my gosh, no one's ever asked me that before. And that was probably the first moment I realized, like, oh, people are going to see me differently. And like that kind of, thankfully, she asked that question before I was in any serious relationships or things like that, where like it was coming up. Um, so I had time to think about that answer before I had to actually like say that to a romantic partner. Like, no, like things are okay. Like, you know, it was, I always would get nervous because it was like, is this just like a consent thing or are they just concerned? Like,
Yes, right? That extra mental load of like, how do I interpret this question?
right. Like, is this truly just like you're asking for consent on this or are you asking because you're nervous you're going to somehow hurt me? Or like,
Yes.
I don't know how to word that any differently. I think you're getting it.
Absolutely. So I know on here I've shared that by the time I was 18, I had both my hips replaced. And my first hip replacement scar is like actually relatively large. It's both are probably about like 3 to 4 inches, and my first one is at least a half inch wide, and then my second one was a lot smaller. So I don't know why there is a difference. One is very noticeable, and the other one is not as noticeable. But in those first couple years after the surgery, scars are really pink and they are
Yeah.
like very visible. And so I would have these moments where individuals were seeing my scars for the first time. And if I haven't prepped them of, hey, just so you know, I have
Yeah.
these scars, they'd be like, oh my God, what happened to you? Are you okay? Should we stop? Is this going to hurt you? And I'm like, the vibe is going down. You know what? It is really hard to make hip replacements sound sexy at all.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, there's no turning back from that one.
And I do have some other surgery, so I do have some other scars on my like elbows and wrists and things like that. And just my body does move differently, and that doesn't mean that I don't have that capacity or
Yeah.
like a sexual side of me. It just is a fact that I have arthritis and I have these scars, and it's not a hard stop.
Yeah. I want to ask you this. So once you had your scars, right? Because I noticed. So I have four ports placed. So I have
Yeah.
scars up here on my chest, and they are noticeable, specifically in bathing suit season.
Yeah.
People are very much can see it. But right after I had these placed and things were healing, and I was clear to do whatever I wanted to do, I felt very self conscious at first because I was, how do I, even though I was with my husband already, like it
Yeah.
was still like, is he looking at them? Is he noticing them? Because I was still so concerned about them. And that's calmed
Absolutely.
down. But is that something that you went
Oh,
through as
yeah.
well?
I would get kind of like a bristle reaction. if like my partner would touch my scars,
Yeah.
and I'd be like, oh, I'm sorry. Like they would
Yeah.
kind of gross me out.
Yeah.
And this sensation of just like touching your scars, like it does feel different.
It does.
And so that was something that like we did talk about of like this is something that I don't feel really confident on, and I just kind of got that feedback back from him, and he was like, "That is not what I'm paying attention to." And
Yeah, like they didn't care. They had no clue what was
yeah,
going on, and I'm over here like in my head about it.
yes, yep. Where I think that it is, we filter things through that insecurity of, oh my gosh, they're having all of these thoughts. And I make up all of these scenarios of like, these are all your thoughts that you're having during this experience, right? And then I got that confirmation back of like, actually, I have none of those ever.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
having a good relationship with that individual where you can have those communications. When I was in less serious relationships, I just would avoid it. I just wouldn't talk about it. Or if they had questions, sometimes like I knew that they wanted to ask, but they didn't know how to.
yeah.
And so it became a much bigger barrier there than what it really needed to be if we had that open communication. But where I am right now, one, the scars have gotten so much less noticeable. But as like you're just like going about your life swimsuit season, I am
I'm not
kind
ready
of
for it.
yeah, like I remember like being younger and I would make up these stories. It'd be like, what happened? I'd be like, oh, shark bite,
Yeah.
bear attack, like these
I
random things.
yeah, I recently wore a shirt to work, and it kind of like was like a square. I don't know
Yeah,
the official title, but you could see my scars on it, and that was like the first time I ever wore a shirt like that to work, where people could see it, and I was like, "Are you looking? Don't look. Don't
yes,
ask."
yeah.
But yeah, same thing at swimsuit season. So hopefully, this year will be a better year.
Our next microaggression is patronization. Praises for almost anything achieved. The pity smile, y'all. The pity smile. I am
Yep.
deep in the Midwest, and we are really good at
Yeah.
this pity smile where I would be just out in public and I could tell it was the day where I'm walking with a limp and people just pity smile. There's
They do. They really do.
like, oh, sweetie, these sweeties, the honeys, I don't know how you do it.
All
You
the
are
time.
just such an inspiration for existing.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I got that a lot in school. They're like,
Yeah.
you are such an inspiration. You're doing all this. I'm like, inspiration? I- I'm barely surviving right now. What are you talking about? Um, but no, the smiles in the grocery store when you're limping, or you know, oh, let me get this, really help you with that. The,
Oh,
the honeys and sweeties, those ones always get me.
yeah.
I don't mind it. I think I don't mind it as much now. It used to really bother me. It depends if they add something to it.
When I was recovering from the hip replacements, you first start out with a walker, and I don't really remember going anywhere with my walker except to like rehab, just because it's a pretty intense recovery. But
Yeah.
as I was progressing and like eventually got to the cane level, I remember just hating being out in public, just hating it because the cane invited so many more
It
comments
does.
from individuals of the patronization of like, oh, look at you being out and about, or it's so good to see
Right.
you. I had to, like, at the time my family would go to church, and I remember this moment of just it was a post cane, so I was walking without any assistance, and um, we at the time were going to a Catholic church, and so we do this like communal thing, so
Yeah.
you like walk up, and I just remember literally the entire congregation coming up to me afterwards and praising me for walking, and it
Yeah.
was so uncomfortable. Um, and then as I enter into that parent stage, just these praises of like carrying the
Yeah.
infant car seat. Oh, I don't know how you do it. That's like half your size.
Right. Like we had a NICU stay. So when he came home, he needed some extra attention, and they'd be like, I don't know how you do it between your, because it would be like I would have an infusion, and then that night where my partner would step up that night and take care of it, but he also needed sleep, so I didn't matter. 6 a.m. like that feeding time woke up, I had to go. We had to go feed him, get on the next thing, and I just remember going, I just don't know how you do it. You are
Yeah.
so strong. I'm like, it's not that, it's just what every other parent would do. Like,
Yeah. It's
that's
just
just
being a parent.
it's just
Yeah.
being a parent. I'm just
Yeah.
taking care of my child.
Yeah. And our last one here is the disability being discounted or not believed by others based on looking healthy or young. This comes up with the, oh, I didn't even know that you have that. You can't tell that you have arthritis.
You're
Or
too young.
you're too young. You're too
Yeah.
pretty for that. Like, yes, that's how diseases work. That's gonna
Yes.
say, nope, not this one. She's too young. She's got a symmetrical face.
Right. No, it's the young always got me. Well, too bad I have it. So, you
Yeah.
know, now we gotta deal with it. But
Yes.
I we I saw that a lot with for some reason when I was a child, my infusions were done at an adult infusion center.
Mm.
So it would be me and older people.
Mm-hmm.
And as we know, some older people really like to know information. So what are you here for? What do you got going on? Oh, you're too young to have that. No, you're only old people like me have arthritis. Okay, well, okay,
I must
I
be
have
in the
it.
wrong spot.
Yeah, yeah. So like things like that would pop up. They still do.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of crossing that like threshold into parenthood too, of just having to, this one I think ties in with our very first one of our disease being discredited of,
Yeah,
oh, well, does that really affect you anymore? It's been so long. Yep, that's the chronic part.
yeah. That's the chronic part, and I think people often forget that we have been through a lot in our lives. We've gone through surgeries, we've had infusions, and I'd be hard pressed. I don't think I could find anybody who has a chronic illness that doesn't have some form of anxiety around certain
Yeah,
things. Um, and like
yeah,
I have horrible, horrible anxiety before infusions, and that's for a reason. And people are like, that still bothers you? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it still does. Yes,
Uh,
it still does.
I think when we are able to really name these themes, name these microaggressions, we actually start to take away the power that they have when we're
We do.
able to say, this is something that you do experience. You are right to feel this way. You're right to have that irritation at that person. You're right to say, no, ma'am, I'm not going to answer that. Or I really suggest just starting to just say, like, what a weird question to ask.
That's a good one. I like
Just
that.
that. What a weird thing to say to me. And being able to just kind of have that hard stop of, you don't owe anyone this story.
Yeah,
You are making the right decisions for yourself and for your family, and we believe in you and hope that you join this conversation with us. I can't wait to hear all of the different stories that we all have. So go ahead, put them in our comment section. You can find this post on Instagram later too at Thriving Together Podcast, and join the conversation, because when we know that we are not alone in this, we feel so much stronger and validated. And that's why we created this space here. There's no judgment in this space. We are not your typical online mom group. So
we are not.
go ahead and join us here. And if anything in this episode resonated with you, please go ahead and give us a 5-star review wherever you are listening, and we look forward to continue building this community with you. So, with that, we are going to sign off here, and we will see you again thriving together.
Yeah, thank you for joining. Bye.